Now studying Sotah, page 7. And here we have a Mishnah that the Mishnah says that the husband brings her to the local bedin, to the local courthouse, if he found her with someone else in a private place. They're not sure what happened. And the bedin listens, and then they send his wife and himself with two Talmidei Chacham, with two scholars. So she shouldn't have any relations with her husband during that time, as the law is that if the husband has relations with his wife after the event that he accused her of being with someone, then the potion doesn't work. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that the husband's believed for her to go alone. The Talmud brings down a few interesting things. Number one, it says, why do we send two people, the husband and two people with the woman? Maybe that supports another Talmudic statement that in rural areas, where you need to be able to keep and make sure the woman is innocent, you need three people. Because two people is not enough. One may go away to the bathroom for a moment. You always need three people. So even if one goes away, there's still two people there. And people don't sin generally publicly. They only sin if they're alone with the person. So the Gemara says, no, we need the two people as witnesses. That if the husband had relations, the witnesses to say they had relations, and we cannot bring it to the Bed Din. Let's not waste the time in the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. But it doesn't support that you need three people. Then the Gemara asks the question, why specifically do you need to send two to Milcham, two scholars? Maybe this supports another concept that this, what we just said before, that two people sort of watch each other only works with people that are moral, etc. But with immoral people, even 10 people are not enough because they're all interested in sinning and they have no shame or embarrassment. So he says, no, the reason we send scholars is doesn't support necessarily this opinion. We send scholars because the husband has to be warned. Before you do a sin, to be punishable by the sin, you have to be warned. So the husband has to be warned to know that if he has relations with her, that all of a sudden he's not going to be able to be checked. So that's why you do it. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says that the husband is enough to believe her. You trust the husband. And where does he come from? So he says it's simple. We look in the other parts of the Torah where the law of Anida, a woman and a husband who are married, even though they're parts of the month, they're not allowed to be together when she is in the Nida state, they still live together. And they don't need to have witnesses to make sure that they're not living together physically. And a nida, if they have relations, the sin is much graver than the sotah if they have relations. So therefore, he's trusted. The rabbi said this refutes itself. But because the nida is graver, the sin, he'll be more careful. But a sotah is not such a sin. He just won't be able to be checked. So therefore, he's not so careful. So therefore, you need to have two witnesses to be able to warn him and to watch him. Now, isn't there a verse? It's brought down a verse Rabbi Yehuda brings down that the man brings his wife. So here we know clearly that the man brings his wife. So the answer is that biblically, yes, biblically the man brings his wife, but the rabbis said that the we don't trust the man alone. Why? Because even though by nida we trust the wife alone because it's graver, but also nida she has a time very soon when her nida state, the menstrual state is over. They're permitted to be together. Even though it's graver, it's going to be something that will pass. But by a sota, there she will never be permitted to him if she actually sinned. So the chances are I may never be with her. So all of a sudden, when you have a situation, when you have something that's forbidden and you don't know when it will be permitted, it's called mayim gnuvin yutaku. All of a sudden, the prohibited seems very sweet and almost impossible to contain yourself to partake of it. So therefore, the we don't believe her by the Sotah. So Rabbi Yehuda says we still say we believe her because if the Torah says by Nida, then as well you can believe her in this situation as well. Then the Mishnah, we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah goes and tells us what happened. So they used to bring her to the bed in Jerusalem, and they used to place fear in her, just like they place fear on witnesses who come for capital punishment cases. And they say, listen here, it's possible that you did have relations with the person, and wine can make this happen, or lightheadedness can make this happen, or sometimes you're immature, sometimes you had bad influence from neighbors. So make sure, please help us make sure that if you did something with this man, don't cause God's name to be erased, because God's name was erased from the parchment into the water, which is a terrible thing to do. God does it to be able to bring peace in the home if she didn't have anything occur between her and the man, but don't make it happen if you did. And you then start telling her things that she shouldn't even be listening to. You talk to her as a very fine woman, hopefully that some words will convince her to admit if she did something wrong. If she says, yes, I did something wrong, then her ksuva, she loses her ktuva, and you get the get, and she goes out. But let's say she says, no, I never did anything wrong. You're accusing me. He's accusing you. I never did anything wrong. So then you bring her to the eastern gate, by Shar Niknar. One of the gates was named after the person who brought it from Egypt, and that's where they used to give the Sotah to drink, because when she drank, she may die right away. So it's in a place where one side of the gate it's holy, and there can't be any death happening there. The other side of the gate could be some kind of level of impurity. And that's also where they purify the lepers, because they're also in that type of situation. And the Kohen takes her clothes and rips her clothes to a certain extent, obviously not to make her naked, but rips to a certain extent, and then enough that it covers till her chest, and he breaks off her hair, meaning if her hair isn't made in a nice way, he just breaks it apart, so it's just lying. And Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that if she was beautiful, he didn't do anything to sort of reveal any part of her body or her skin, because other people may be aroused when they watch what's happening. So to the hair. If the hair was beautiful, you don't let it down, because again, it may arouse some people, and that's not what you want to happen at that time. If she was wearing white, you give her a dress her in black. If she was wearing very beautiful jewelry, you take it off to make her look ugly. You do many things to make her look ugly. You take a little string and you tie it around to keep her clothing up above her chest. And whoever wants to see the event is allowed to go see it, what's happening, except for her any of her servants, because when she sees her servants, if she's the master, she also gets a false pride, and she may all of a sudden start saying, "No, no, 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 I'm not guilty," because she'll look embarrassed if she says guilty and they see what's happening. And it says that all the women are allowed to see her, and actually we encourage the women to see what's happening, so they should themselves be loyal within their marriages. So now the Talmud says, how do we know that the whole law of Sotah has to be done by the Sanhedrin, has to be done by the great court that's in Jerusalem? So we learn it from elsewhere, where the Torah tells us that you have to do things with 71 judges, the Sanhedrin. So we learn from elsewhere that you have to do it with 71 judges. It's not enough to have even a court that deals 23 judges that deals with life and death issues. It's not enough for the Sotah. It has to happen by the temple, by the Beis Hamikdash. Now we say that we sort of tire her out, and we try to scare her. So the question is, we find somewhere it says that just like we tire her out so she shouldn't drink, so we also tire her out and try to get her to drink. So how does this work? Meaning we tell her, now listen, if you're sure that you're pure and nothing happened, don't worry, don't admit, don't feel guilty or bad if you didn't do the sin. Because if you didn't do the sin, the water can't kill you. It will be just like water that's sitting on top of flesh. It doesn't do anything. Only if you sin, God makes the water affect you. Otherwise, nothing happens to you. Um, so do we scare her into drinking the water, or like now we say don't say you're not guilty if you're guilty, and don't drink the water. So we say like this: before we erase God's name, we scare her not to drink the water. Say, if you're guilty, tell us you're guilty. But once we already erased God's name and we started that process, we want to encourage her to drink the water. Because if you told us already you feel that you're not guilty, now that we erase God's name, you're going to say guilty. So we try to convince her, don't be scared now. Don't be scared now and say you're guilty if you're not guilty, and encourage her to keep to her not guilty, because naturally people get very scared and concerned, and it may not work. Then the Gemara tells us that we tell her things that she's not worthy of hearing. What do we tell her? We tell her some things from the Torah, and here we find something very fascinating. What do we find? We find that we tell her that some of the greatest people sinned, and it was embarrassing, but yet they owned up to their sin. Who do we find? Specifically, we tell about Yehuda, Judah, two of Jacob's sons. Yehuda, he sinned with Tamar. He thought she was a prostitute, and he had relations with her. Only later he found out that she was pregnant, and he thought it wasn't from him. He thought that she had an affair. Then he realized it was with him, and he agreed, and he opened up publicly to his sin. What happened at the end? He was given a great place in the world to come. Reuven, the oldest of Jacob's sons, also admitted to his sin. He wasn't embarrassed. What was the end? He also got a great place in the world to come. Now, these were awards that they got, rewards that they got after they passed away. But even before they passed away, it says that that they were given a reward even in this world, that their children, they went into Israel, and Reuven got the first part of Israel, and Yehuda got an incredible part of Israel. And it lasted the longest. So they even got rewards in this world for their owning up to their sin. So we're telling the women, if you sin, even greater people sin, but they owned up to their sin and they confessed. So then we say, how do we know that they confessed? So by Yehuda, we find it very clearly. Yehuda says in the story of Tamar, when she sent the three symbols that he left with her, and he said, whoever these belong to, I became pregnant from, then he realized that she didn't have an affair. It was with him she became pregnant. And he could have held his dignity and his pride and still put her to death as he said he was going to do. But he didn't do that. He said, she's right, and he brought her into his life, and etc., etc. So there we know that Yehuda owned up, he confessed. But how do we know about Reuven? So we'll talk that in a minute. We find it says that let Reuven live in the blessing given to him, let Reuven live and not die. And this is what will happen to Yehuda. So we put Reuven and Yehuda together in the blessings. Why? Because all the years when Moses blessed the people, all the years that the Jewish people were in the desert, it says that the bones of Yehuda, the remains of Yehuda, and all the 12 tribes, their remains were taken out of Egypt to be brought to Israel. They were in his box, but they were not settled until Moshe prayed for him, and then everything settled. What happened? He says, God, Yehuda confessed in his sin, but that's not only it. He caused Reuven also to confess for his sin. So when he said that, Hashem listened. He said, okay, he let the bones come together and be a little more settled. But yet, in the heavens, he wasn't able to equally be part of the study of what the Torah that happens in heavens with all the great people like him. So then Moshe continued to pray, and then he was allowed to sit with them in the study of Torah in the heavens. But yet he wasn't able to talk equally as they did in the heavens. He didn't have that yet. So Moshe prayed, and all of a sudden he was able to study and learn and lead and come to conclusions. Because why? Because he encouraged Reuven to admit his sin as well. Why did Reuven admit? And actually, sometimes it's not good, because if someone sins and then they talk publicly about their sin, it's like you're not embarrassed about your sin. God wants you to feel bad about your sin. So to talk publicly about your sin shows you don't care about it. So what was the reason Reuven spoke up about his sin that he did when he moved his father's bed from Rachel's maidservant to his mother after Rachel died, which he never really slept with his. He never really slept with this with the maidservant, but his father said it's like if you had an affair because you got involved in my personal affairs. So there we find that Yehuda Reuven finally admitted, but that's boasting. Well, what's so good about him admitting? The answer is that Reuven admitted so his father should know who did it and not to think any of the other brothers did it. So he did it to save the other ones from being suspected. And so it wasn't about boasting, but he felt terrible about it, but he did it to be able to save his brothers. So we find this is what we tell the women. We're trying to talk to her, someone who possibly sinned and had an affair, fell to a low, but we try to raise her up and say, look at the greats of the Jewish people. You can be like them as well and admit if you did something wrong, and then nothing will happen to you. This is the end of today's page.